Well, we've got a really exciting session to get straight into now. I'm pleased to introduce the Honorable Tim Groser, whose extensive expertise in trade and government will provide valuable insights into navigating the global trade winds and geopolitics. Following Tim's address, we'll move into an engaging panel discussion. Tim will be joined by economist, author and media commentator Shamabil Yaqub, also CEO of the Bank of the Cook Islands, Jennifer Henry, and also award-winning company director and industry leader, Tracy Hopapa. So a fantastic panel. Together with our distinguished panelists, they'll explore macroeconomic trends, indigenous trade policies, and market strategies. Let's get straight into it. Welcome to the stage, Tim Groser.
First of all, is the mic working? Excellent. Mike, can you let me know when we've got 2 minutes to go or something like that? Because I've been asked to describe the state of the world economy, the implications of the US election, and what it means for global peace and security. And if I've got time, I'll deal with the meaning of life at the end of it. Look, at this level of aggregate, this is not a helicopter view I'm giving you. This is like SpaceX view. So I know all the qualifications I should be adding. I haven't got time to go into the detail and why what I'm saying is an exaggeration, but it's the bigger picture that I'm looking at, okay? So every person in this room has lived their entire life in the most benign period of human existence in terms of material gains. This is the process that we'll call by this strange name globalization. And as you hear all these other words, deglobalization, decoupling, fragmented globalization, nearshoring, inshoring, friendshoring, just remember that the picture that people like me have been working in, first of all as New Zealand's chief negotiator before I went across to the dark side to go into politics, we've been integrating markets, ideas, and people along generally liberal lines. And I actually think you can date peak globalization with almost absurd precision, November 2015. And I choose that date, although I can see the seeds of the problem earlier. I choose that date because that was the date where the Chinese and the Americans came together to sign the Paris Agreement on global climate change. And people like me, we thought we were moving from what has been called a G1 world since 1945, G meaning government, one meaning obviously the United States, to a G2 world, which would be China and the United States, for all their differences, coming together on the biggest global issues to provide the sense of direction. The Paris Agreement was exactly made possible for that reason. But then it came apart with remarkable rapidity. I can remember sitting when I was ambassador in Washington during the first Trump years. I almost literally fell off my seat when I read what's called the NSS. This is the National Security Statement of the United States. It's meant to be the peak strategic doctrine of the most important country in the world. And in the executive summary, it opened up with the words, "The principal objective of China is to destroy the security and prosperity of the United States." And I thought, what? Surely the principal objective of China is to increase the security and prosperity of China. But this is a zero-sum mind in place. It is not enough that I succeed. You must be seen to fail. This is what we're now dealing with in the White House. And the question is, how far can it go? So we've had this benign period of human history. We've seen the most extraordinary explosion of wealth. The World Bank Index of Absolute Poverty, I won't bore you with the definition. These are serious people. It'll be a good definition. The number of people on the planet who were living in absolute poverty was 62%. As recently as 1960. This is not ancient history. The number today is 14%. The average life expectancy of human beings on the planet across the whole world has increased by 30 years since 1960. This is extraordinary human progress. And yes, the anti-globalization people come up with the tired cliche, a rising sea doesn't lift all boats. Well, of course, as if there was some type of overall paradigm that could deal with all people's problems in all countries for all times. As somebody once said, a stagnant swamp lifts no boats. So this is now under threat, and as a small nation which cannot have a first world economy without a first world export economy, and we need access to markets, and we need some stability and some rules, this is pretty disturbing. First of all, the US election. I'm going to have to use a very crude term. I would say that whoever it is that runs the Democratic Party, the real decisions that decided, let's put Joe Biden up and he can be president till he's 86. They say that when you're looking down a slippery slope, the only difficult step to take is the first step. Whoever they are, they're less transparent than the Standing Committee of the Communist Party of China. Oh, but I think they do have better gender diversity, so we shouldn't be too harsh on them. Whoever made that decision then flipped it after Trump intuitively but brilliantly said during the debate, I don't understand a word of what he's saying. And I don't think he does either. This can only be described as the 21st century's biggest single political clusterfuck. Now, I personally think she's a very intelligent person. I thought she showed that during the one debate that Trump had with her, but I don't think her political EQ is all that hot. And this disastrous response was the gotcha moment of the entire election, when you knew that 71% of the American public feels America's not moving in the right direction. And a deliberate soft question is thrown up. If you had been the president, what would you have done differently? And then your answer is, I can't think of a single thing. This is incompetence off an interplanetary scale, right? So, but the first point I want to make about the election, there's so much to decode about the US election that's really, really deep and very, very important to understand. But the most important thing is this is not a landslide win. America hasn't turned down some dark far-right corner as a people, as many commentators who should know better are saying, like the New York Times editorial was the day after the election was declared, was just simply absurd. It said, this shows what a terrible country we are. No, it doesn't. She got 48.4% of the vote, in spite of all this. They're holding the House, the Senate, and the presidency, but they're holding the House by 218 votes to 212. We just need one decent, juicy sex scandal, and that could flip. So the question is, how far are they going to go? Now, the biggest issue here is global peace and security. And I'm genuinely, obviously worried about that, because we have got the most dangerous security situation since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. We have this war in Europe where nearly 1 million, largely young men, have died for nothing, absolutely nothing. And we have a war in the Middle East. And the two principal decision makers, Putin and Netanyahu, face exactly the same conundrum. Do I negotiate or do I escalate? And let us remember, both of them have nuclear weapons. So this is a very dangerous situation, and the time it's going to take to put this administration in place while this is going on is absurd. It's difficult at the best of times to deal with lame duck. But we've now got months, because when he gets inaugurated, I was there sitting just above the president the last time. It was a dreadful experience. This will take months to get the 4,000 appointments that have to go through the Senate, even if the Republicans control the Senate. So we're in a long period of uncertainty here, ladies and gentlemen. In terms of the trade and economic side. For those of you who don't know my background, so I was New Zealand's chief trade negotiator from 1986 to basically 2005. I was a chief negotiator in the Uruguay round, the round that settled all the big deals for New Zealand, brought rules into agriculture, which was crucially important, and stopped this farce of this negotiation we used to do every 3 years with Britain and Brussels, where they decide how much more of a leg and an arm they wanted to take off. And then started the TPP exercise and blah, blah, blah. So I'm a trade guy. Now, people talk about Trump being unpredictable, and I understand, of course I understand why. But there is a predictability about his direction of travel. And he is absolutely a convinced protectionist. When you hear, I'm the tariff man, this is not some front. So he won't, of course, put 10 to 20% tariffs on all imports and 60% tariffs on China. It would cause chaos for a start. 50% of American imports are intermediate goods. That means, well, for example, take in New Zealand. We don't sell by and large, sell meat to Americans, consumers. No, we sell it to McDonald's, which use it as an intermediate good in hamburgers. So you raise the cost of every business in the United States, you're going to see some feed through. The only point of putting on a tariff is to increase the price. This is like simple economics. If an American company can't compete at the existing price level, you put a tariff on to increase the prices. And the other huge takeaway from this election is that Americans really, really hate inflation, okay? According to the Economist YouGov poll, done the day after the election, when asked what was the number one issue on which you base your vote, prices was the number one issue by far. Now, people like you people in this room, you follow these issues properly. You knew that the COVID and the supply shocks caused the spike in inflation, which was then monetized. And you know that the Fed seems to have achieved this remarkable disinflation, and that the headline CPI, whatever you might look under the hood to see what's going on, was falling to 2.1. But sorry, out there in voter land, they don't think like you do. All they know is that prices are a hell of a lot higher than they used to. They know, like New Zealand consumers, that I used to go to New World, walk down the shelves, and a litre of Pam's olive oil used to be $14.99. Now it's $29.99. By the way, the cause of this is climate change. I haven't got time to explain. But you still feel pissed off, all right? And they threw the bums out, as it were, on this issue. So Trump has got to be very careful about inflation, because contained within his trade policy, within his monetary policy, the threats to reduce the independence of the Fed, within his fiscal policy are the seeds, I don't think, to go back up to COVID style, 6, 7, 8%, but absolutely not to settle down to the 2 to 3 level. So we'll wait and see where the political transmission lies. Now, not all the people around him, and this was certainly the case when I was ambassador in Washington during his first administration, are whack jobs, okay? I mean, Elon Musk is a genius, and I think you have to be very, very deep about how you analyze what he does. You know, he doesn't want to be the president. Well, why should he want to be the president? He can buy one for $100 million. You know, and a man worth, $300 billion, that's chump change. So, but what he's going to do, I don't know. I'll tell you one thing he's not going to do, and that is reduce the deficit of the United States anytime soon. So in Trump's first presidency, he added $8 trillion to the stock of debt. And as you probably have read, because you would be reading the same things that I read, that is now about the size of defense spending. If you add what the OMB calls legally bound payments plus defense plus interest, you've got $1 trillion left for everything else. So we'll see where he goes. But one thing is clear. we have got some very powerful friends. In the field of trade, I like to use this analogy, and I'll stop Mike at the end of this analogy, that in 1930s, our forebears had the common sense after the Napier earthquake to set up the Earthquake and War Damage Commission, and the equally strong common sense to invest its assets overseas. And I remember when I was a cabinet minister, we were told that the Christchurch earthquake, the second one, was the largest insured earthquake in the history of the world. Clearly not the largest earthquake, the largest insured earthquake, because we had paid our dues over 50 years. Unlike San Francisco, for example, where I understand the percentage of houses that have got earthquake insurance is 6%. It's just crazy. So in trade, we've paid our insurance premium over the last 50 years. So when Britain went into the then EEC, now EU, 44% of our total exports were at risk. We faced a risk that is, whatever risk we face today is nothing compared with the risk we faced 50 years ago. And we put in place a whole series of trade agreements, each one of them opposed by Professor Jane Kelsey of Auckland University. Thank God the Labour Party never listened to her. And successive Labour-led, successive national-led governments over 50 years have got all these alternatives we can fall back on. So whatever he does will not be positive. But, you know, I wanted advice from the person I admire the most in the world, but unfortunately she passed away last year. This is Queen Elizabeth II. So I held a séance with her. There's a terrific, if you need to have a séance, there's an old guy who sleeps rough in Fort Street. That's the man you want. And I said, Your Majesty, I've got to go and speak to some Kiwis. What do you think I should say? Well, the first thing I would say is how much my husband and I liked our visits to New Zealand and how fond we are of the Maoris. I would say that what you should say is, carry on, chaps, and keep calm. I don't think I can improve on that.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tim. Oh, jeez. Might have been having a séance myself there for a minute. Tim Groser, everyone. Give him a huge round of applause for that presentation. But now I'd like to welcome up our panel, Tracy Hopapa. Tim is going to sit in with us as well, Jennifer Henry and Shamabil Jacob. Give them a big round of applause. Fantastic. Okay. Well, this panel discussion and the topic of this panel is about the charting the uncertain economic trade waters. Tim has very candidly shared his thoughts around the implications of a Trump-led economic agenda and how that may impact global trade with us here and across the Pacific. So I'm interested in your views as a panel about the external influences and demands driving the changes in the state of the global economy. What are the opportunities, the risks and challenges we're facing as a small trading nation and as businesses in this space? I'm going to start with you, Jennifer. Kia ora, welcome. I know you've got a couple of slides to contextualise the opportunities and issues that are facing the Cook Islands and across to Moana Nui, Akiwa, the wider Pacific region. So maybe you can start.
Kia ora, me taki. Kia ora na tātou katoa. It's a pleasure to be here in this forum today and share a perspective from across the Te Moana Nui o Kiwa. Tōku ingoa ko Jennifer Henry, te pūaka aere o te panika o te Cookie Island, raua ko te Association of the Development Finance Institutes of the Pacific. I'm privileged to be here as the CEO of the Bank of the Cook Islands and the current chair of the Association of Development Finance Institutes of the Pacific. Charting an uncertain economic trade waters of Aotearoa, a Pacific perspective. For Bank of the Cook Islands, tō tātou orama, te tango turu mani, tiaki e mono tuato, no te iti tangata kukiarani. Our vision is nurturing the financial well-being of our Cook Islands people, contributing to a legacy of prosperity and sustainability in harmony with our culture and our environment. As the National Bank, we are known as the People's Bank. From the top down, our ethos is about our people and our contribution to the community and our cultural identity. From delivering full-service banking, trade and payments, as well as ensuring the stability and affordability of financial services. We are the only bank on every populated island in the Cook Islands. As you can see from the slide, we have a tiny landmass and a huge ocean. Our ocean is larger than the size of India. We have a small resident population and a growing tourism numbers, of which 2/3 come from New Zealand. In terms of GDP per capita, Cook Islands is half that of New Zealand. Now, what does this look like in the Cook Islands with regards to charting the uncertain economic and trade waters? Right now, our government is in a phase of discovery. With the recently published National ICT Policy, activities that are underpinning this include the e-commerce work plan and considerations of merchant surcharging and domestic interchange. Some of those in consideration include automatic transfer systems, considerations of joining ESAS and Payments New Zealand. Cook Islands dollar is the New Zealand dollar. In this phase of discovery, it's really important that we take lessons learned from New Zealand. And I know many of you in this room can meaningfully feed into this space in shaping our future. For the Pacific, the decrease in correspondent banking relationships due to de-risking, or call it what you will, debanking, is a key issue, and this is a very serious conversation, as is climate change. Bank of the Cook Islands is now a Green Climate Fund accredited entity. We are the first in Polynesia to be accredited as a national direct access entity for on-lending and blending. We now join our counterparts in Micronesia and Melanesia. Now, given the size of our country and the science on cyclone intensity that is increasing in the Pacific, our focus is on adaptation and adaptation finance. However, we know New Zealand organisations with regards to mitigation have climate objectives to achieve. And I wonder if there are some win-win opportunities to partner with the large ocean carbon sinks on climate initiatives. Pacific Islands, we are small. It means our scale is small, but we realise the value of collaboration. The Association of Development Finance Institutes of the Pacific, or ADFIP, is a collaboration of 20 development banks with a shared agenda towards sustainable finance. I am privileged and honoured to be here as the chair representing our Pacific voice. So across the Pacific, we have similar challenges to that experienced here in New Zealand. And in this forum, we've heard yesterday that even the major banks in New Zealand are finding themselves stretched with resources, stating a lack of scale within which to address this. Yet in the Pacific, we have this to deliver on the exact same services on a fraction of the budget and a fraction of the scale. We have a saying in the Pacific, tuakana, teina, which means big brother, or big sister, little sister. Culturally, we are your tuakana and you are our teina. Economically, New Zealand is our tuakana and we are your teina. The key message here is we are not looking for a handout, but a hand up. On day one, we heard from our kaumātua o te matawhenua, Rereata Mākiha. In the observance of Moana Give Back Days, I was honoured to hear that. And may Aotearoa think of their brothers and sisters across the Moana Nui o Kiva on these days. Me take māta.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, well, that's probably a good time to bring you in, Tracy, wearing your many hats, particularly in Māori enterprise and exporting. What do you see as the opportunities and challenges ahead for Māori in Aotearoa?
Tēnā koe hoa, koutou rā kua taima I rungi ngā huatango te wā tēnei te mihi me te aroha. It's a minute, always good to spend time with you, Tim, and thank you for entertaining us and opening up the session so well. I felt like clapping a lot of the time, so yeah, thanks very much. For Māori enterprise and certainly Māori trade and export, we are sharing the same issues, challenges and opportunities that you're discussing here in this room. So when we think about Māori, and I'm talking about the big and wide continuum of who we are, we understand that there is a social and economic deficit, which we are all working together to address. For the purposes of this conversation, though, I want to talk about Māori trade and export and enterprise. So the conversation that Tim talked about earlier with regards to a rules-based trading arrangement globally is something that benefits Māori. We have always traded as Indigenous peoples in the context of Aotearoa New Zealand, then we're still trading. And so when we think about what's happening here in New Zealand as an economy and getting things right, when we think about what's happening globally in terms of the geopolitical shifts, and they are big shifts, then Māori are concerned about those as well, Mike. We want to make sure we have direct and ready access to market. We want to make sure that trade barriers and tariffs are out of the way so we can do business. And we also want to be recognised, or need to be recognised by New Zealand industry and trade, because when we think about doubling, this export double aspiration that this government has, and I think in principle it's probably a smart idea, worked before, it's going to work again, then Māori need to be part of those conversations, largely because when we think about red meat, 35% of the New Zealand's red meat exports are Māori. 30% of dairy comes off Māori-owned land, ahu whenua, meraka, and so being part of these conversations is important for Māori. We want to know about trade and export. Tim and I go back. We have been in negotiations together. We shaped out TPP. That was fun, wasn't it, Tim? Together. And then what we are now talking about is how do New Zealand Māori help our Cookie Island Māori and our Pacifica brothers and sisters in terms of our experience around trade, export, innovation and enterprise. The last thing that I'll say here is that one of the things that I'm loving about being Māori and here in New Zealand is we're leading out the Indigenous Peoples Economic Trade and Cooperation Arrangement. Our founding partners are Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and ourselves with the US as observers. Dollar figure for that trading value is 65 billion NZD. So when we're thinking about Indigenous business and trade, it's more than blankets and beads. We did that last century, it didn't work. So now we're thinking more about where we're going this time around, so happy to be part of this conversation.
Fantastic. Tracy, thank you. Okay, Shamabil, so what's your take on the state of the macroeconomic state and where the trade and export opportunities and challenges are?
So I think for us, well, I'm really loud. For us, I think the big thing is the US has been what China was to us post-GFC. So after the GFC, during the GFC, it was the exports of dairy, meat, and forestry that saved our export sector. Since post-pandemic, it's been the US that has saved our export sector. And right now, I'm extremely concerned because we still have our major trading partners in Australia, UK, Japan, China, actually under a lot of pressure. And our exports to those countries are still very weak, but US have been holding up. With the change of government there is a really big risk in terms of what happens to those trade rules and policies and business relationships, but also just the uncertainty that Tim talked about so eloquently and colorfully before. My sense is that there is also a bigger, longer-term issue for New Zealand. We have free-ridden and participated in shaping this global system that has benefited us greatly. That big surge of globalization of the last 80 years has played to New Zealand's significant advantage. As that comes under pressure, I think New Zealand is going to have to forge new ways of doing things, and we're not ready. We're not ready because we're still led by people who are from the 1980s thinking, and we're going to have to think very hard about how we do things differently. And the reason I say this is when you think about the economy, you can describe it as what's going on, or you can think about it as what causes prosperity. What causes prosperity is geography, culture, and institutions. We're stuck on geography. We're far away. Our culture is the culture. It's hard to change quickly. And the institutions are the things that we work so bloody hard on together in the wider system that led to our benefits. I think with Trump essentially vandalizing the institutions of the US and the supranational agencies around the world, that rule of law that has really defined international trade policy is going to be under attack. And that to me is the biggest economic risk that faces New Zealand.
Thank you, Shamabeel. I'm interested in your views on the best approach we should be taking in respect to trade policy. Should we be moving from traditional trade policy approach that is country-centric to taking more modular business-to-business approach? And what does it mean for global alliances and trade in general? Where does rangatiratanga or self-determination come into play? And maybe we'll start with you, Tracy. Māori exporters and Indigenous trade channels have been quietly getting on with the mahi and building their own economic power bases, but maybe by sidestepping traditional trade routes. What's your view on this?
Yeah, I know that markets change based on consumer preferences. So we know that. And we also know that people do business with people when we've got things that we want to trade in terms of goods, services or IP. I think two things with regards to Māori trade and export. What we're starting to see more is the market trend to consumer businesses, consumer-led market enabled, makes sense, but that's also Te Ao Māori thinking. We've always provided and served the needs of people in terms of trade and export and even imports. And so that will continue to happen. From a Māori perspective, we are more recently, maybe over the last 10 years, Mike, starting to look at direct import and exports with Indigenous exporters offshore, mostly in the North Americas, but increasingly engaged in conversations with South America or Latin America as well. For us, we want to do good business for good returns so that we can in turn grow the wealth and prosperity of our people. And that's the bottom line.
Thank you, Tracy. Jennifer, obviously your context is different, but in the Pacific you face, I guess, the same issues as us as a small nation around scale, influence, investment. So what's your view on this?
Thank you. So it's correct. We are the lack of scale, but also the Pacific is literally at the end of the shipping line. So the final costs to the end user is the all charges, all inclusive. So whatever trade policies that can take place, that can be negotiated, that shed some of this end user cost, is a win-win to our Pacific people. For example, just after post-pandemic, for a homeowner, the building cost or building materials once arrived with the shipping inclusive has gone up 40%. From a financing perspective, that's less borrowing power for a home loan for a first homeowner in the Pacific, less by 40%. So my take from the Pacific is, rangatiratanga and self-determination is already at the very beacon of our Pacific, and where those trade policies can enable concessions, also the better.
Thank you. Tim, I'll bring you in here, and Shamabil, I'll go to you after Tim.
Well, there is nothing to stop new thinking. I mean, just get out there and do it, for God's sake. So, you know, we don't need the government to tell you what the new thinking you need to do is. Just get out and do it, all right? And I just want to underline the importance of what Tracy was saying in particular about what a positive role Māori business plays in our export economy. I've always understood this. I'm the guy that put the first Treaty of Waitangi clause into a trade agreement, into an international agreement. Nobody asked me to do it. No Māori pressure group, no politician or anyone. I just came to the conclusion in 1993 that the treaty debate was evolving in ways that were difficult to predict. And therefore, I didn't want an international legal commitment to get in the way of the evolution of that debate. And I also put it into the next trade agreement, the foundation stone of TPP with Singapore. And we've got some tremendous Māori business leaders in this country. I wanted just a small divertissement into energy policy, climate change. First of all, I mean, I agree with all of Shamabil's point. I mean, the election of Trump is just bad news. The question is, how bad is it? And to illustrate the point, just think about climate change for a minute. I'm certain he will withdraw from the Paris Agreement. But how much difference, just let's analyze this, to put the emotion out of it, how much difference will that make? Now, the US has achieved a complete decoupling of its economic growth from growth of emissions. Up to 1990, in fact, this is true of the globe, with the CAGR, the compound average growth rate of global GDP from 1920 through to 2020 has grown at 3%. Growth of emissions has been almost parallel until 10 years ago when they started to diverge. In the United States, the divergence is complete. The US economy in nominal terms has increased around 70% since 1990. US emissions are the same as they were in 1990. Now, this isn't because of international agreements. The United States never joined the Kyoto Protocol, okay? The Senate threw it out 95-0 in a proxy vote in 1997. 95-0. Paris Agreement's only been in place since the beginning of 2016. So this extraordinary progress that the United States has made in decoupling has got nothing to do with international agreements on climate change. It's caused by deeper forces, and in particular, the application of technology to decarbonize solutions. That's not going to stop because of this man in the White House. Ex-Con is campaigning strongly, largely I think for political reasons, for him not to withdraw. But he will. But don't tell me that the major companies, including everything that Elon Musk owns, are going to assume that climate change can be just washed away with an ideological stroke of the brush. Of course not. They're going to carry on with extraordinary technological innovation, as we are. And I just want to say, that's got a very strong Māori business element to it. So one of my hats at the moment, I don't talk about this in public because it's, I have a strong view that ex-politicians should get out of the public limelight, unless they're like me, a stand-up comic, And, well, I was a professional actor for many years, before, as a child, right through to early 20s. Oh, I was. And, I very nearly made a fatal mistake of accepting, instead of a job in the Treasury as a junior economist, the job of being the young male lead on a new TV soap opera, because I'd been on Close to Home. But thank God, somehow at that age of 23, I made the right decision. I think it was the only right decision I made at that age. So I'm strategic advisor at GNS Science. That's a very fancy title because we can't say we appoint you as the political fixer. But what I've been doing, working with some incredible people, is getting GNS $60 million out of Kānoa to invest in this unbelievable resource that we have in the Taupo volcanic zone, supercritical geothermal energy, that has got the capacity to transform this economy. And it will have huge positive implications for Māori economic development. Miraka, for example, one of the businesses that Tracy was mentioning behind that data point you gave us of the share of dairy exports, they're already using geothermal heat for drying. People are justly proud of the fact that 87% of our electricity comes from renewable. We're putting aside the technical point that electricity isn't energy, it's a form of transmitting energy. Putting aside that technical point, electricity is a subset of total energy. And in terms of total energy, only 40% of our total energy is provided for by renewables. But if our scientists are right, and they're absolutely confident we can be the first country in the world to crack this unlimited source of renewable energy in the central North Island, which is the world's biggest and best resource, as big as Yellowstone, and easier to get to because it's so much shallower. We can electrify the whole country. We can actually start to deal with climate change seriously instead of this idea of just paying it off by buying offsets, which is not the right approach. So I'm off to Japan with two of our extraordinary scientists, both women, one's French, the other's Maori.
Powerful.
You know her?
No, I don't.
Dr. Savan?
Yes, I do.
And one outstanding New Zealand official who's been a friend of mine for years. And we're going to explain this to a very series of people in Japan who are watching us closely. So, you know, that's new thinking. It's boldness. If it fails, but the scientists are very optimistic that it won't, well, it'll have cost us $60 million. But one of the things that I think a lot of us feel is it's time for boldness, ladies and gentlemen. This safety culture epitomized by these bloody red traffic cones everywhere. we got to move beyond this.
Tim, I'm going to jump in here. Chamberlain.
I'm just trying to launch the basis for a new political career for us.
Chamberlain, I think we might move on to the next question. Mostly because I've forgotten what the other question was. But I'm sure you've got a fledgling acting career you want to tell us about as well. I wanted to touch on the impact of international markets and infrastructure. Thank you, Tim. It's been wonderful. It's been very entertaining. I wanted to touch on international markets and infrastructure on smaller economies like our own and how current dynamics are reshaping the global financial system. What are your views on the erosion of the dollarization, debanking, remittance, and increasing harmonisation of regional payment hubs, and what this means for trust and financial infrastructures worldwide?
I think just relating to what Tim was talking about, a lot of the harmonization and the coming together of rules and regulations has happened not only because of industry, but because of government involvement as well.
Yeah.
If that government involvement is going to fade away or is going to become more disruptive, which I think is the most likely scenario now, then we have to think, how is it that we find different ways of doing it? The harmonization is absolutely critical because that free sharing of information that's consistent, that's safe, all of those things are absolutely critical for global payment systems, global trade, and global interaction. And my sense is that if it's not going to be led with that stable backdrop of geopolitics, then we have to create it within smaller nations and within blocks, but really based on evidence, high quality stuff. And this is where Minister Bailey's comments were so important. You know, if we have vested interests in the room who are stopping that good stuff from happening because it serves your purpose to maintain the status quo, get out of the way. Because you'll be doing more damage to the system and to your future than to speed it up and do it as well as possible. And I might just touch very quickly on your previous question, which is really around the relationship between us and other countries and the role of, I guess, the supranational deals and those kinds of things. Fundamentally, it's about trade is just business with people who happen to be in a different country, right? It just happens to be that it's across borders. Those relationships don't change, but the trade relationships and those other things really helped and supercharged the process. But those relationships are still very much at the backdrop for everything that happens. And I don't think we should lose sight of that. For New Zealand businesses, I think it's really about making sure we stop relying on government to open doors and make things easy. We have to do that hard work ourselves. Hire Tim, go to Japan, see those people, sell the ideas, sell the business. It's not just going to be government doing it for you, because government is no longer the common denominator when it comes to global trade. It is going to be as much about business and a much bigger role for business than has been the case. Spread your wings.
Thank you, Shamabeel.
Mike, can I just add something on the payment side, because I think it's very important. So, as you're aware, in about 2000, 21% of global forex were in dollars. It's fallen to 59%. Trump is threatening to disrupt the international payment systems, not just tariffs. So we have another system, SIPS, along with the CHIPS system that you're familiar with. I don't need to define it because this is your job. And he's saying, if you want to deal and settle in anything other than US dollars, you're not going to deal with us. So there is actually a major threat coming out of Trump land on the international payment system, and you need to take account of this. I don't know how we're going to manage this. The Reserve Bank has had a swap facility of about 5 billion Kiwi, I think that's about 25 billion RMB, since 2011. So are they going to try and weaponize this system further? Just watch this space, you people in the payments area.
Thank you, and it's probably a good way to wrap up. I'm going to ask Jennifer and Tracy. In fact, let's go around the whole panel. We are, sitting in front of some of the best minds when it comes to payments in the country. What's your call to action? I'll start with you, Jennifer.
So, call to action, I already highlighted around correspondent banking being topical in the Pacific, and as Tim has further elaborated, it's even going to be more important in the Pacific. And what it really means is, how do we transact with other countries? How do we have another foreign currency settled for a trade transaction just between two businesses? The relationships aren't changing there. So it's really important, but as Shamabeel says, we development banks in the Pacific are quite prepared to spread our wings and find other opportunities to be able to address that issue. One of the key issues really is it boils down to regulations. And I know a lot of correspondent banks have, de-risked us or debanked the Pacific, lack of scale, but really it's around risk appetite. So mindful about what does those regulations in your country mean for you as a bank in terms of, what fines are you going to have, or is there perceived that you have in with regards to trading with banks in the Pacific? And is this a conversation with the regulators in terms of a lack of understanding in terms of the appetite, or is that something we can challenge? That's a number of things, and the call to action there is let's bring about some Pacific forum and payments to address the resilience of our payment system in the Pacific.
Thank you. Tracy?
Your whakaaro rangatira is he pūaha pūtea, he pūaha tangata. So pūtea and people makes some sense to me. The world is changing. So this conversation about the world has changed. The world's changing. It always has. And so our job, people like us who make decisions every day that determine the direction of businesses, industry, countries, economies, is to make it easy, to make it simple, to Shamabeel's point, get out of our own way from time to time. And I think as one of the world's most southern Pacific islands, Aotearoa needs to buddy up. We've got good relationships and a good brand, and so sitting alongside of leaders like Jennifer and her Prime Minister and government makes some really good sense. And I think really mining the value of the relationships, the trust and confidence that the brand of Aotearoa New Zealand has internationally is going to do us well.
Shamabeel, call to action.
My call to action is, in the transactions industry, we see the transaction, that's your power. Your superpower is seeing the relationships that sit behind the transactions. And it's in those relationships where the power sits. Everything that we're seeing from the outside, from the politics, is those relationships, and the backdrop of that is changing. But the fundamental relationship between businesses, people, and nations will still remain. Your job is to be able to lift yourselves up from looking simply through the transactions of going through the system to seeing the people, the businesses, and the countries that sit behind it. I think your job is to elevate yourselves to the wider system, because that's where you are much needed to be able to smooth some of the frictions that are rising.
Very good. Tim.
Just follow Her Majesty's advice.
Very good. Please give a big round of applause to our panel.